Hello everyone, and welcome to our webcast today on the state of employee engagement. Today we'll be sharing results from a recent survey we conducted to understand best practices that are being used to improve employee engagement. My name is Charles Rogel, and I'm the Vice President of Products and Marketing here at DecisionWise. Joining me is Tennille Rodman.
Hello.
Tennille is a Senior Consultant at DecisionWise, and she runs engagement projects with companies around the world. She's also an expert on how to conduct employee surveys and get the most from the results. She's currently completing a master's degree in predictive analytics from Northwestern University. DecisionWise has been in business since 1996. We specialize in conducting employee engagement surveys and helping our clients use the feedback to promote organization improvement. This webcast is scheduled for 60 minutes. Everyone is on mute, so if you have questions, please use the question tool to submit them, and we will try to address them as we go. I provided the slides that we'll use today in the handout section of the webcast tool. So if you scroll over on the webcast tool and look at the handouts portion, you'll see two handouts to download. One will be the slides, the other will be the sample survey. This webcast has also been approved for 1 hour of HRCI and SHRM recertification credit. At the end of the presentation, I'll provide you the activity codes, and I'll also send you a follow-up email with the codes along with the links to the slides and other downloads from today's presentation. So to begin, I just wanted to review the agenda for today. We're going to look at a few different things. First, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the methodology to the survey, what we were trying to measure and how we went about doing it. Then we'll look at the demographics to show you kind of the breakout of the over 200 organizations that participated and the types of people that provided feedback. We're going to spend the bulk of the time reviewing the overall findings. There were about 30 questions in the survey that we're reviewing. And then we'll share some insights. We did a little bit of analysis to look at some of the correlations between what some of the best companies are doing with employee engagement. And we'll share some of those best practices in the summary at the end. So as we look at the methodology, we had a few different objectives that we wanted to accomplish. One, we wanted to understand the importance of employee engagement. By that, I mean we were wondering, is employee engagement still important to organizations today, or is it kind of a passing fad that's being replaced by other new initiatives in the marketplace? We also wanted to see what organizations were doing to measure employee engagement, because there's some new tools on the market, some new methods people are using, and we wanted to see what was currently being used. And we also wanted to see what was working to improve employee engagement. So not only just measuring it, but what initiatives companies were using to make their workplace more engaging to their employees. So the survey we conducted, like I mentioned, has about 30 questions. There were 7 demographic questions just to find out who was taking it. And then we got over 200 responses from companies around the world, although the bulk of the responses were based here in the US and also some in Canada. We measured people's understanding of engagement, how important they thought engagement was, their perceived outcomes, how it's measured, and then what they perceived as their overall level of employee engagement in their organization. And then we did some statistical analysis that we'll share towards the end of our presentation today. So first, I've got Tennille here as our color commentary.
Yes.
A color commentator. And so she'll provide some more insights as she's worked with hundreds of organizations around the world to conduct employee engagement surveys. She'll kind of provide some more perspective on some of the data that we're seeing here and the interesting findings. So to give you an idea of who participated, we're showing now the amount of revenue and number of employees. And really the outcome here is that there are over 20 different industries represented. Over half the companies have 1,000 employees or more. And so we have a very good demographic sample, I'd say, of the marketplace to provide some good insight into the data that we're looking at today. We also looked at what department they were in, what title they had. We found that most of the people were HR managers and above, so 73% are in human resources. And then if you look at the what is this, green or the blue to the yellow area here or the pink area, those are all managers up to vice presidents and even C-level executives. Then we looked at we wanted to check people's understanding of employee engagement. And this wasn't too surprising because knowing the audience that we sent the survey out to being mostly HR people, we figured that most of them would understand engagement. So we provided them a definition of engagement and ask them, how familiar are you with this definition according to this and other definitions that you're aware of? And by far, most people were familiar, so we had 86% of the people being familiar or very familiar. And that was good news because that also confirmed that we got people that are that were qualified to basically respond to most of the other questions on our survey. So this is where it starts getting interesting as we look at the importance of employee engagement in organizations. And we asked two questions, and these were to the HR, mostly to the HR managers in the organization. We wanted to know what they perceived as the importance of engagement to executives and also managers in the organization.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed, Charles, is with clients I've worked with, when the executive team is really on board and understands engagement, understands the importance, and they understand, how to tie it to performance metrics, it really makes the whole engagement process more successful, as well as action planning and improvements in engagement.
Yeah, and so it was good to see that when you're looking at the level of importance that they're perceiving around engagement, that the executives are focused or finding more importance in the concept than managers. And this is kind of due to, I think, that trickle-down approach. So even though more managers or more executives find it very important, there's still a great majority of managers. In fact, I think it was 72%, 72% are important, very important for executives, and the 64% important, very important for managers. So pretty close, but again, there's some alignment there that could take place to make it more important. The next item was looking at the benefits of employee engagement. So we listed a bunch of benefits on the survey. We also got some open-ended responses. We asked them to rank order these benefits to give us their top 5. And the ones that came to the top were increases in employee performance, retention, and then satisfaction. And we weren't too surprised by this. This is their perceived, just thinking about engagement overall, what do you perceive it to, how important, or how do you expect it to benefit the organization overall? And these were pretty straightforward. I think next time we do the survey, we might take off employee satisfaction because we look at that as kind of foundational to engagement.
Right, and a lot of people use that term congruent with engagement, even though it is a little different. I'm not surprised by this. When I talk to clients who are looking to do it, or if they've already kind of signed into the process, this is a lot of the discussions that we have with them. How can this help retain good employees? Our top performers are most engaged. How can we tie these to customer satisfaction metrics? And so this is not surprising to me.
Yeah, and one slide we'll get to later talks about retention, and with most of these organizations, retention is a big initiative, or is also very important to them. And retention is one of the reasons that drives their engagement programs or their investment in it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so then we asked, do you have a formal engagement program in place? Do you have a program that you've named your employee engagement program and that you're kind of all rallied around? The good news is 55% of people do. 40% said no, but they're still doing things about engagement. And then we asked for those that didn't have an engagement program, why not? And the top reason was competing priorities, lack of support from the executive team, and that's a frequent reason we hear from HR people. They want to do an engagement survey, they want to boost engagement, but they've got an uphill battle with their executive team.
And and as I mentioned, getting that executive buy-in is really important to the initiatives that come out of the engagement survey.
Right.
You need that executive buy-in to kind of move those forward as well, get the momentum going. But there are companies, with other competing priorities. I think that, there's a lot of reasons why that might be. Sometimes if people are going through a merger, an acquisition, I've had clients come and say, I want to do the survey, and then it gets delayed for 3 months because of other competing priorities. But I've even had people in the midst of those want to do an engagement because they know it's important to the culture to understand that.
And I think one thing you can do to kind of wrap employee engagement into the company priorities is to make it the people priority.
Yeah.
So it falls under a bigger umbrella, but it's still one of the things you can promote. As we looked at the different types of employee engagement initiatives that that companies are doing, it was interesting to see in the past 3 years what types of things they've implemented. So employee feedback, meaning employee surveys, kind of measuring it. Companies, events, and parties, recognition programs, wellness programs are the top 4. Training is in the 5th spot there, and training on employee engagement. So those might be mixed together. You know, maybe they're doing training on engagement, so we got 2 responses. But I think training, we also see that one's ranked a little bit lower, but we see that one as one of those things that really boosts engagement and makes a difference.
Yeah, it's all about the focus on your employees. A lot of times, if you're going to do a survey, it gets wrapped into an employee appreciation week or some other initiative, you know, with a company event or part of a recognition program. So it all kind of ties in together.
And it was interesting as we asked a follow-up question, said, okay, you're doing all these things, but how successful do you feel these programs have been over the past 3 years in increasing engagement? You know, very successful, only 9%. Successful, 24%. Somewhat successful, 50%. And maybe that's because people aren't really able to measure the tie-in or the benefit. You know, that's a hard kind of equation to come up with. Maybe they're not in the know. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good response. We got some more data to show you along those lines to kind of tie this together. That'll be more insightful. And then we asked them to rate overall how successful they felt these programs have been. And oh, I think I have the same. Oh, this is the same slide. Sorry, same data, but again, we can move on to this one. So we said, okay, well, in the future, what are you planning on doing? So you kind of know what's been successful in the past. What do you have for plans in the future? Kind of the same stuff. Recognition programs popped up above company events and parties. Training is on there, other types of training, wellness programs, things like that. But they'll continue measuring engagement. Employee feedback is going to be one of those initiatives. We also got a lot of don't know responses here because, again, people didn't know what they're doing in the future. And then only 6% or 6.2 didn't plan to continue engagement initiatives. So we wanted to get into this concept to understand how they're measuring engagement and what impact that's having on increasing engagement as well. So there's a lot of data here. I know a lot of people on this presentation are conducting an annual engagement survey or something similar. This will give us some insight to see what other people are doing. So in terms of the last one that was conducted, over half or about half done it in the last year. Or 2 years. So within the last 3 years, most of the audience have done one. Only a few, 20% there have not.
Yeah, I think it's a good, most of my clients do it every year. And if you brand it as a company initiative, then, you know, it's the same time each year, and you can use it to plan, you know, your fiscal year or resources or other trainings that you want to do. So I like doing it, you know, seeing companies do it each year as a standard metric.
And then plans for the future. We have, you know, at least, let's see, what did I say, 42% of companies plan to conduct an employee engagement survey for at least the next 2 years. And again, that's kind of a hard question to ask because they're not sure about initiatives or what they're going to be doing in 2 years. Not many companies do, but again, people are going to continue to do so. And then we said, well, how many years have you been measuring engagement? You know, so we wanted to see, okay, well, who's experienced out there, who's done it for a long time, and who's kind of just getting into the process. And it was surprising to find out that 39% have conducted an employee engagement survey for 5 years or more.
Yeah.
And 60% have been conducting it for 3 years or more. So that was interesting to see, a lot of experience out there. And I think maybe one of the dangers is the process going stale.
Yeah, I have some clients who come and, you know, they've been using a certain provider for a number of years and they want to change things up, or, you know, some of my clients, we've been doing them for 4 or 5 years and we want to do a new kind of refresh of the process. Yeah. I think the main concept of measuring engagement is still important, but you do want to keep it fresh for the employees and make sure you're using up-to-date, current things happening in the culture.
Yeah, I think that 3-year window or that 3-year time frame is that time where people start reevaluating where they're at, what they're doing, how they're doing it, are we seeing the benefit that we want, and they look to kind of change during that 4th year. The frequency of measuring employee engagement was another interesting data point that we wanted to find out. So there's been a lot of recent talk and news about, or interest in conducting surveys more frequently, having an always-on type of tool, or sending out pulse surveys on a weekly basis with a shorter number of questions. But basically staying on top of what employees are feeling about engagement, because you're not always engaged, right? So it's kind of a taking one snapshot annually might not tell you the level of engagement today as opposed to 6 months ago. And so what we found is most organizations are conducting an annual engagement survey, but there's some variety in terms of the others. It was kind of surprising to see people on this 18-month to over 2-year cycle as well, so not as many doing it annually.
Yeah, this is a question I get a lot from clients. Should we be doing it more often than annually? Or a couple of my clients do it every 2 years, and they do want a metric because it's a snapshot in time. But I think it's important to update annually what your engagement metric is, and then if you want to do pulse surveys or quarterly to kind of assess progress that you're making, that's always good to do.
Yeah, because I think what we look at when you're conducting an engagement survey, you're looking to use the results to create a company-wide initiative for that year.
Yeah.
And it's hard to kind of steer the ship every quarter or every month with new data. You really want to roll out that initiative, see how it's had an impact on engagement over that year, measure it again. And like you've mentioned before, Tennille, conduct those pulse surveys to measure the progress on the initiative as maybe opposed to measuring multiple items on your survey.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves thinking organizational change can happen quickly, and it does take time, and it takes time to understand where your employees are, and you do have other competing priorities, and so you need to give them some time to make changes and make things happen before you measure again.
When we looked at the consistency of measuring engagement, so we've kind of figured out, okay, over the past, a lot of people have done a survey over 5 years, a lot of people do it annually. We want to say, okay, well, what are you more consistent, less consistent, sporadic? It was neat to see that 41% of organizations are consistent. In other words, they're measuring each year for at least the past 3 years. 41, and then you can see people are less consistent, sometimes sporadic and that sort of thing, or they just started. That 24% there was a large category as well. Now we wanted to know, okay, for your most recent survey, did you do this internally using a software tool, outsource to a third party, do something else, or didn't you know? And it was interesting that most that have participated have outsourced this to a third party. We find that more frequently with maybe mid-sized companies. So larger companies might have the internal resources to run this internally. Smaller companies might run or use a software tool because they're not really doing anything sophisticated yet. But those companies between maybe 100 to 500 employees up to 10,000 employees are typically working with an outside provider for their expertise. And then data collection methods. This was just interesting to see a paper survey. I really want to find out, are people still using paper surveys?
Yeah, and to the point of, we're increasing in a paperless world, paper surveys still have a place, and I think it's relevant to talk about. I work with clients all over the world, and some of them are in manufacturing environments or restaurant environments where a paper survey is still the best option. And trying to get employees on the clock to get to a computer isn't reasonable. Yeah. And so sometimes, but I think this is indicative. Most people have gone to online surveys and they get data faster if you do it online. Right. But paper surveys do still have a place, I think.
Yeah, and we were curious because we thought, okay, with the onset of smartphones, everyone pretty much has a smartphone. So even in a manufacturing plant, you could still take your survey that way. But participation suffers.
Yeah.
Because getting them to take the survey is the second challenge, and getting everyone together in a room and handing out paper surveys really gets you the response rate higher. Yeah. So I wanted to find out, okay, what kind of participation were companies getting? And on average, people reported 75% of employees participated in an employee engagement survey.
Yep. That's about average with what I've seen. The clients I work with, our average rate is 75% participation, so it's right on with what I see. I think it's, if you talk about customer sat surveys, sometimes your participation rates are 20-30%. But with engagement, if you really want to understand and get good data, you do need a higher rate. So I'm glad to see that this is high.
Well, and if you have a low participation rate, what is that typically indicative of?
Yeah, I've had a couple clients with really low rates, and it's really a trust issue. And, we talked about outsourcing. A lot of times companies will outsource because they want to ensure that trust is there, and they don't have any reason for employees to question the confidentiality of the survey. And so when you do that and you communicate it correctly, then you can get those higher participation rates.
We also wanted to know if people were comparing their scores to other scores within the industry. And so we found that 2% of the people participating did benchmark their results to others in the industry or some other kind of global benchmark.
Yeah.
And most times to do that, you'll need to work with an outside provider who has those benchmarks.
Right. Getting executive buy-in, this is a hook you can use to say, well, if you let us go outside, or if we do this, we'll get benchmarks, and they're always interested in that.
And then we asked a question and said, and this is, I don't know how much I can trust this piece of data, but we said, according to your most recent survey results, what percentage of employees are engaged? And it's somewhat broad in that it's fully engaged, or somewhat engaged. So people gave us a number, and we took the average number, and it came up to 66% of all the responses we received, which is pretty good. So 66% of the workforce is engaged, 34% disengaged. Our benchmark's a little bit higher than that. We're around 75% we find in measuring engagement. Yeah, it's 75 to 78, I think we call engaged employees, either fully engaged or somewhat engaged, mostly engaged. And each company may measure engagement a little differently. We have our engagement model. So I think this is interesting. I'm glad it's not less than this, because I've seen some research out there that says only 20% of employees are engaged these days. But I think this is a pretty good number to have. Yeah. So it was good insight to see. Now, this question was a little more accurate, I think. And so we're saying, okay, based on your survey results over the past 3 years, has the overall level of employee engagement in your organization trended upward, stayed the same, or gone downward? So purple is upward, blue is the same, and green is downward. And so it's good to see that 32% of employees or of companies reported an upward trend. Yeah, I think, this is indicative. Engagement has been in the sphere for a while, and so people are aware of it. As we saw, people have been doing surveys for at least 3 years. Yeah. And so to see, you can actually see those trends now that you have year-over-year data. I think this is also can be attributed to the increased upswing in the economy, and people are choosing a job where they can be more engaged, or there's more education around engagement, and employees can take responsibility for their own engagement. Well, yeah, and more investing in employees in general. Yeah. And one thing I was going to say is staying the same isn't necessarily bad. So you look at someone that's done an engagement survey for 5 years, maybe they've gotten all the gains they could get in a way. They're still trying to maintain a high level of engagement. So staying the same at a high level is good news. And some might have even gone down a percentage point or two. But if you're up there pretty high, then you're in good shape. Yeah. We wanted to find out what people are doing with their engagement survey results and how effective they were in using the data. So the one preliminary question was, okay, do you even share the results with different groups? Please check all that applies. So the executive team obviously is involved. I was surprised it's not at 100%, and HR wasn't at 100% either. But all managers was a little bit lower, all employees, 53 responses there. And then, some managers, so if you're not sharing with all managers, people would mark some managers here or some employees. So it's good to see that most of the results are kind of getting out to yeah, sometimes in, really large organizations, I work with an organizational development team rather than HR, and so HR may just get the normal manager scores. But I'm a little disappointed in this all employees is only at 53. I always encourage my clients that they need to share the results with employees, even if it's just overall scores, a very high level.
employees should know they're the ones who gave the feedback, and so closing that feedback loop is important.
Yeah, otherwise you do the survey next year and they'll say, well, what's the
They're not going to take it.
No.
They're not going to take it.
So then we said we want to know about action planning. So it's one thing to share the results. Who's involved in action planning on the results? Good news is the HR team and executive team are, but you'll see the numbers go down as we look at managers and employees especially.
Yeah, Charles, I've been, this week actually, I'm preparing for a big meeting regarding action planning with HR leaders, and I'm really trying to focus in on helping them coach their managers. And so I think it is important that managers understand how to action plan. If you know, our best practice recommendation is if a manager receives a report, they should create an action plan, and they should have that feedback meeting with the employees. So there's some work that needs to be done there, I think.
And we have some good comparison. We'll show you some more insight into this particular data point later on. Now we're looking at the creation of employee engagement survey action plan. So it's one thing to action plan or to have, you know, to roll out an initiative to do action planning. This might be one and the same question, but who's actually creating a plan? And it's good to see executives are, HR is as well. Managers, 55%. So that's okay, I guess.
Okay.
I guess I look at that and say that's about average what we'd expect. Companies that do a better job would have about maybe, what, 75% of their managers actually doing it?
Yeah, and you have to remember some managers don't get a report if they don't have enough responses, but managers who do, again, any manager who gets a report should create an action plan, and that really helps facilitate improving engagement and improving the culture and employees wanting to take the survey. Again, it's all kind of connected there.
Well, and the one thing is the executive team is really responsible to kind of set the tone, create a couple initiatives at the top that roll down, and then managers have something to work with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're kind of stuck. We wanted to know if companies were training on employee engagement, and by that we meant a formal session on what employee engagement is and how to increase it in the organization. And so we were kind of surprised. Well, not. Well, I don't know how
I think this is a new thing.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm not fully surprised by it, but I think it's a new thing that, you know, they know what, HR knows what engagement is, but now it's time to tell employees what it is.
Yeah, so not too many responses there for managers, which is really the most important population.
Right.
You can get them on board understanding it, they'll do a better job of engaging their team. And we're curious to see, okay, so you're measuring engagement, and we all know that it increases, well, we all believe that it increases performance and you know, it has all these other effects within the organization. Now, are you taking your results and tying it to any other business metrics within the organization? Well, retention is the biggest one. And that coincides with the other data that we've seen where retention is really important to organizations. That's why they're focused on engagement. Some are looking at performance metrics, customer satisfaction. Profitability is a low one, but we find that as well, right? Just because it's hard to get the data you need to make that comparison overall.
Yeah, and as an outside third party, a lot of times, you know, they don't share that information with us, or how do you correlate? You have to figure out the numbers you're using and the scales you're using, and how are we going to correlate. I have done correlations, though, with, you know, higher engagement has had higher profitable locations for different departments.
It works. This metric works for organizations that have kind of a distributed model where there's maybe a variety of stores or locations that all are kind of homogeneous, and then you can compare their engagement to their profitability. So we wanted to know how many were working with external providers to help improve engagement. So not only to conduct, so not to conduct the survey. Well, let's see. They have survey comes. But are you working like with consulting firms, training companies, that sort of thing? 34% said yes. So they are getting some help out there. And then we asked a question that said, okay, how much are you spending on employee engagement? And we didn't get too high of a response rate here, simply because I think people didn't know. They weren't the right person to kind of ask, maybe. And so we got a variety of different responses. The average was 64,000. We got one response up there at 300,500. So that kind of gives you an idea of the range. And that varies greatly as well, because we had some companies with over $5 billion in revenue and some with $1 million in revenue.
Yeah, and the number of employees also impacts the price as
well. We wanted to see if people are actually measuring their ROI, and this is a hard question. So, you know, people are saying, yeah, it increases performance, and we're seeing some gains when it comes to, you know, retention, but they're not truly looking at the ROI. Another, only 9% actually measured the ROI on their employee engagement programs. It's a hard thing to do. I'm not too surprised. And then we phrased this question a little bit differently. We said, okay, well, what ways have you seen a return on your investment on employee engagement? And again, satisfaction is up there at the top, but retention was the real one, along with performance and satisfaction. So these might be more anecdotal reportings of observations that are hard to quantify, but people are seeing these types of improvements. A lot of don't knows as well. That's kind of insightful here. Yeah. The belief in employee engagement that will increase ROI. So this is, why are you doing engagement if it's not going to increase ROI? Do you even believe it will? And or has? And so, you know, our programs that get us the ROI we've hoped for. We've got a bunch of don't knows, 38%. And so again, they might be launching our engagement programs to improve retention. Not quite sure what kind of bang for their buck they're going to see or return they want. But heck, if we saw a 10% increase in retention, that'd be great. Yeah. Yeah. So only 27% believe their programs have produced the ROI they've hoped for. We had an open-ended question. We said, describe the impact of employee engagement in your organization. We got a lot of good responses. I'm throwing up a few on the screen that kind of summarize what that was, but it was mainly positive. So huge impact, work in progress, very positive to our cultural goals. It's vital in terms of providing quality care and fulfilling our mission in the community. So people definitely have a positive outlook on employee engagement, even though I might have frustrated them with those previous questions on ROI. Yeah. Now let's get into some insights here. We want to look at one particular question. So we're kind of going to pivot off of this question on engagement trending upwards, because I feel like this was one of the items that was kind of was more accurate in terms of them reporting. Mm-hmm. So you can tell if engagement is going upward and downward compared to your results. We're going to look at this 32% for the most part and see what they're doing differently than the rest of the companies out there. So when we said, we get back to this retention question. So how concerned is your organization about retention? Those that have an upward trend are very concerned or somewhat concerned, more so than the other groups, so that stayed the same and went downward. Mm-hmm. Not too surprising. Yeah. Again, that's a big and good reason to be.
Yeah, some of my clients, they actually have a number. They know how much turnover costs them. Yeah. And so it's very concrete in their mind, especially with some executives. They know how much retention costs them, and so they want to do whatever they can to.
And it's millions of dollars for most organizations.
It
is. And just increasing retention by 1% can save $1 million for an organization. So a lot of real money there. One thing we found is that those that have engagement trending upward have engagement programs. So they've labeled an official employee engagement program in the organization. 90% of them have, and they're working towards that. So it's not just a survey. There is an official program going on that has support from the executive team. Then we said, what are you doing about training on engagement? And one of the key findings here is that they're doing more training than others. And so you see here the two kind of smaller ones in the middle, even though these responses are less, they are doing more training on employee engagement and other types of training in the organization. Also, wellness programs is a difference between the different groups. Those that stayed the same are in purple, and then downward is red here again. So again, if you're looking for what's something we can do differently, we've been doing employee surveys for a number of years. What do we really need to do? Well, training is one of those keys. We said, okay, well, how long have they been measuring employee engagement? Those that are trending upwards have been doing it for a long time. 71% have been measuring engagement for 3 years or more. These are the more experienced people that have been, doing this for a while. And how often? How frequently? Well, the highest response rate was annually for these employee surveys, and then you'll see a mix of quarterly and others. Some are doing it less frequently, but that annual employee survey seems to be the most common
Yeah.
one.
That's consistent with what I would see with my clients.
Yeah. And I even looked at the consistency one again. This one's more, is a little bit, what's the word, more diverse, but 45% of companies with upward trending levels have measured engagement consistently. If you add in those that just started, then you're up at, what, 50 or 63%, 62%. And they also use benchmarks. So it was interesting to see that, okay, yeah, we're benchmarking ourselves against an industry, and we have a goal that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's the psychological thing of dangling a carrot, and then you know what you need to work for.
Yeah, we have room to improve. And
yeah, sometimes I consult with clients and I say, okay, here's your scores, and they're in 70s, 80s, and they're like, well, how does this compare with our competitors, or how do we compare in the industry? And if they have something that's quite a bit lower, they're like, that's not okay, because they want to be competitive in their industry, and so it helps move them a little bit more to increase engagement.
Yeah. So we got a question here about benchmarks from Jolie. If we do not work with a global provider, what are some benchmark sources that you would suggest? That's kind of a hard one. There's a couple things you might look into. One is, I think the Great Places to Work organization publishes their data, but not many companies do provide that comparison. So because you have to look at the exact questions, you have to look at how you're measuring engagement, so it's a little bit more difficult to get that type of data and comparison points. And that's one of the problems, I think, in the industry, is that there isn't one universal set of questions, or at least a small set of questions that you can use across the board to measure engagement. So you're kind of out of luck. I don't have any good suggestions for that particular one. The next item was looking at sharing the employee survey results. So again, how are you disseminating results throughout the organization? You can see those trending upward or doing a little bit better job of that.
Yeah, those executive teams are really bought in, and I think that's important, that they understand engagement, they know how to share it with their employees, they champion the process.
Mm-hmm. So the more you can share, the better, or the greater impact you're going to have with your results. Yeah. Then we looked at action planning. So again, looking at the different teams or people, you can see there's quite a spike when it comes to involving all managers.
Yeah.
And so that's a key takeaway here, is that if you want to increase engagement, you've got to get your managers involved.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Another one was training on employee engagement. We touched on this before, but you can see those with an upward trend are providing training much more frequently to their executive team, HR team, and their managers in general. So it's that aspect of just not only taking the results and doing action planning, but training them on those concepts, what it means. We always promote our MAGIC model, meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection as the drivers for engagement. We have a whole training program behind it. And that's what really helps you achieve greater gains. And then this was interesting to us. So this was more of a selfish analysis for me. Of course, we're an outside provider. We work with companies all the time to conduct employee engagement surveys. And I wanted to see, okay, are they doing any better? Are these guys that are upward trending more frequently using outside providers? A little bit more. So significantly.
Yeah, I think, again, this might go back to benchmarks. If you use an outside provider, you have benchmarks, which pushes you a little bit more. So
the other thing here is that, people are capable of doing this on their own, and internally, if you have the resources. The thing that you also get with an outside provider is they're on the hook as well to see you succeed.
Exactly.
And so they've got some skin in the game. They know to win your business the next year, they're going to have to help you get some gains. Otherwise, you're going to look at this and say, why are we measuring this if we're not seeing any improvement?
Yeah.
And this was another interesting one. So again, this came back to that question, what ways have you seen a return on your investment in employee engagement? And, we have retention, performance, and that sort of thing. The big ones here, I'm going to exclude retention. I want to include retention. That's the biggest one. Because you can see that impact, if they're trending upwards in terms of engagement, it's really having a great impact on retention. And so, again, that's the biggest ROI metric that companies are using, and those trending upward are doing a better job at it.
Yeah, one thing that I do with some of my clients is we correlate performance if they have a standard performance metric. And what's interesting is not all your fully engaged are high performers, and not all your high performers are fully engaged.
Yeah.
So there's some recommendations I give with them. Because sometimes your high performers are burned out, and they may be, somewhat engaged or waiting to be engaged. They may need some more help there. So performance is always interesting to correlate, but generally speaking, yeah, your high performers are going to be more engaged, but not all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And we looked at, so now we come to kind of our key findings. We'll kind of wrap up our presentation here today. We've kind of touched on these already, but I'll review them a little bit. We'll discuss them a little bit more. But one of the findings, again, for those that are being more successful at increasing engagement or have more successful programs or seeing better results, are those that are measuring it consistently. Consistently being at least yearly.
Yeah.
And for those that are doing a great job, they're doing a yearly survey, maybe quarterly pulse surveys, and really measuring their gains that they're getting or their progress. But at least yearly is a best practice. That importance of involving managers in action planning, again, those that are doing that are seeing greater gains. And I guess, Tennille, I was going to ask you, what are some best practices to get managers to actually do the action planning?
Yeah, I think, accountability is huge, and you don't want to just rely on HR to hold people accountable, chasing them around saying, where's your action plan?
Yeah.
What I typically recommend is if you're giving a manager a report, they need to share it with their employees, and that way the employees hear the results. Mm-hmm. But then the employees hold the manager accountable because they said, well, we said this, and look, here's your score, and if it's low, we're going to expect you to change that. And so it kind of holds them accountable to do the action planning, and then employees follow up and they ask, hey, what happened to the results? Let's talk about it again. And so I think really getting managers involved, my recommendation is that the manager shares it with the employees, and that helps them then want to create action plans with their employees.
Yeah. We like, of course, we have an online action planning tool called Depot that we use, which helps you to track it. Well, it helps you to create an action plan quite simply from the results, so it's really facilitates that, guides them through that process. But it also helps HR to track who's done it, who hasn't, and that's the other thing is, don't expect a miracle maybe the first time when you do this.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it takes a couple of years to get managers in the mode of really, creating their action plan and making it happen. And I liked your accountability comment because some organizations we work with will also tie in that action plan to their performance appraisal. So they're judged on how well if they created one, and the goals or the things that they achieved in their action plan as part of their performance review. Number 3 is provide training, and in a general way, training in general is a great way to increase employee engagement because people feel like you care about them, you care about their progression, you're giving them opportunities to learn and grow and be challenged. But we would say more specifically, as the results showed here, training on employee engagement.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really important so that managers understand and employees understand how to impact engagement, because it's not just the company's job to increase engagement. It's the employee's job to be engaged and bring their full selves to work each day. And so training them, helping them understand that balance, that they're both responsible for engagement, is important in increasing it.
Measuring the ROI, this is where most people had difficulty kind of quantifying the impact of their efforts. But it's really one of those things that will help you gain the executive support within the organization, support from the managers in the organization. So if you're really trying to create buy-in, you've got to find some ways to tie this to retention, for example, which is one of the easier ones to do.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense for managers. They don't want to lose good employees. They don't want to train new employees. Yeah. So if you can talk about it in terms of just let's help make our employees want to be here and want to give their discretionary effort and to be engaged, I think managers can buy into that pretty easily.
And then lastly, this seems like a selfish plug, but the data actually supported it as well. Work with an outside provider like DecisionWise. And we're not saying you can't be successful without. We know plenty of organizations that do a great job, some of which use our services simply to conduct the survey, and they do most of the other heavy lifting internally. But when you work with an outside provider, you get a high level of expertise, you get an accurate measurement of employee engagement, you get that added layer of confidentiality. So even though your whole process internally is confidential, people still don't believe you. And so when they see a branded survey from another company come through, they know that the data is being held outside of HR.
Yeah, and it's also helpful just, people who've been doing surveys like this, like DecisionWise, we have expertise in how to run it successfully, how to communicate it successfully, and then how to give you recommendations on what to do or how to train. All of those, sometimes people have internal OD teams, but they want to know what other organizations do. And so when you work with an outside provider, you get those insights from different companies.
Yeah, the benchmarking piece as well. Yeah. So I think a lot of times we kind of train our clients up to speed as well. We kind of work ourselves out of a job almost because they end up being experts in engagement as they grow into the process. But you also get with an outside provider the back end help, right? So what do you do now with the results? What kind of training programs can you provide and resources, and really hold the organization accountable to make things happen? So those are the main insights from the results. We've got some time for questions now. I wanted to point your attention to the activity code. So those of you who are attending to receive some HRCI or SHRM recertification credit, you'll see the codes there on the screen. I'll be sending out an email to everyone after the presentation here as well, but go ahead and write those down and type in today's date as the attendance date, and you'll be able to add those to your online profile. So a couple questions to Neil. One is in terms of actually getting high participation rates. So one question that came in before was, what are some best practices around increasing participation on employee engagement survey?
Yeah, so one thing that I would say is you need to have a good communication plan in place. A lot of times I tell people, if your managers are receiving a report, tell them beforehand, because then they encourage their employees and they say, if you all take it, then I can get a report, and if you don't, then I can't. And so, the communication plan, there's a lot of different aspects to it. Number one, having an executive sponsor or the CEO communicating the importance of the survey, communicating, if you're using an outside provider, the confidentiality that's involved, but then communicating with any directors, executives, or managers who are going to get a report. I see a lot of my clients, they have this healthy competition going back and forth where I closed a survey yesterday with a company, they have 2,000 employees, and so they have these 7 executives who are all very competitive, and they're talking about it in their meetings, and they're like, what's your rate? My rate's this, and they're really encouraging employees not just to get a high rate, but to say, I really want your feedback. And so having that communication plan can really help you increase your participation rates.
Another question is how should executive teams approach using the results? What's the outcome expected there from the executive team?
Yeah, I think it's important for executives to understand the state of engagement, but then they need to create an organization-wide kind of action plan. They need to have 1 or 2 initiatives that come out at the company-wide level, and that way managers who are doing action planning can tie in their action plans to the company initiatives, and they also tie it back to hearing employees or understanding employees. And so, some questions that we have on our surveys is, do employees feel like there's going to be change as a result of the survey? Do employees feel like they can speak openly without fear of retribution? And just giving employees a voice, just that one act can help increase engagement. Yeah. And so executives should make an action plan at the company-wide level and come back to it as initiatives as part of their mission for the company to improve, to become more profitable, to have the best employees in the industry, All of those come out of the engagement survey. If you have initiatives saying, we appreciate you and we understand you and we want to do things to increase your engagement, you find a lot of ROI in that.
Yeah. I think that the outcome or the big learning here, if there was one takeaway, would be that your employee survey is not the end of the process. It's not, if you're just measuring engagement year after year and not really doing anything about it, you're going to get the same results.
Yeah, or you're going to get worse results, actually. I've seen that happen where employees are like, you kind of, I talk about it whenever we're creating the questions. I said, this is what you're setting expectations. Based on the questions, if you ask the question, my supervisor regularly recognizes me for job well done, you're setting a bar saying all of our supervisors should be recognizing employees. So when you set, 40 questions, you're saying kind of to your employees, this is the expectations that we have for our company. And so if you just keep saying these are the expectations and not doing anything about it, then it could actually be worse.
You get really annoyed.
Yeah.
It's like, you ask this question, I haven't gotten any recognition for the past year.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so, so it's one thing to conduct a survey. It's another thing to really do something about it. And, like you said, communicating up front is important, but also communicating on the back end that you're actually doing something and that you've gotten some wins helps to confirm that process.
You don't really want executives to be overwhelmed. There's a lot of data that can come out. If you ask 50 questions, there's a lot of data, but you just have to do one or two things. You have to do something. That's what we say. You don't have to have 7 initiatives that come out of a survey because no organization can change that fast and you can't take on that much. But if you do something, then employees understand that and can see that.
Yeah, they give you the benefit of the doubt for everything else too. Well, Tennille, thank you very much, and I want to thank our audience for participating today. Again, look forward to my follow-up email from our presentation, and we look forward to having you join us on our next webinar. Thanks, everybody.